So in this final section, we're going to talk about continuous improvement, which is a requirement really for managing a project in an agile way. So to start with that, I want to kind of bring us back to this diagram where we have our team working towards a clear purpose, which kind of helps us keep on track, when the project gets a little chaotic. And remember, if each one of these kind of arrows is a sprint, after each sprint is an opportunity to go off in a direction that's not conducive to the project, or to course correct back into one that is. And so in order to make those course corrections, we really have to come back as a team and figure out how things are working, what's gone wrong, and what can be done well. And that's the mechanism we can use to help steer us continually towards the place that we want to go. So without this kind of mechanism for regularly reflecting and adapting, agile, it just means chaotic, and that's not really what we were trying to achieve. We don't want to have no plan. We just want to have a plan that adapts and changes based on effective communication within the team. So it's really important to keep that in mind when you're talking about agile. It doesn't just mean we'll just go where the wind takes us. There's some very kind of specific built-in rituals that you need to do in order to make it happen and to make it a fruitful project. So in order to do this in the agile world, they talk about the retrospective. And basically, if we go back to that agile manifesto I was talking about, this is one of their kind of principles that at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective and then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. And so the specific way to do this is they call it the retrospective. Retrospectives should be owned and run by the team. So it's not just whoever the leader is sort of, it's time to meet everybody. The team should want it, should own it, should set their own agenda collaboratively, and even different people can run it at any given time. It doesn't have to be the so-called project manager, leader, head of school, or whatever running it. Retrospectives they're not time to kind of moan and complain about all the things that have gone wrong and blame everybody. They should be focused on solutions. So it's like, okay, this is what's done, this is what's happened, this is how we can kind of correct it in the future, as opposed to getting caught up in the past. You want to use the past to inform the future. And they should be somewhat ritualistic. So not rote and boring. You can kind of change up the methods and do it in different ways, but it should be something that's triggered at the end of every sprint, so that it becomes a habit and something that teams kind of gradually do and even think about when stuff goes wrong. You're like, okay, this is something for the retrospective that we'll discuss it. So the sprint continues on, but we make sure that you have a good set pause to kind of renew and reflect. And so I want to show you a couple examples. So if you're looking for some ideas, you can go to this site called Fun Retrospectives. And one of my favorite versions of that is the Three Little Pigs. But this site has a whole bunch of different ways. So it's just ways of kind of framing the meeting and looking at kind of doing different things. So it doesn't just become kind of a boring set thing. Like you can switch it up and do different things. But the idea of the Three Little Pigs is you start the meeting and basically you set up 3 columns on, say, a board, and the one column is House of Straw. So it's like, what are those things? We all know those things in a project or in a school that are just barely holding on and could fall apart at the any given second. House of Sticks, something that's pretty solid, pretty good, but could use some improvements. And then it's always good to celebrate successes. So the House of Bricks is the things that are rock solid that you're really strong at. And basically, in this particular case, the participants get Post-it notes and stick them on the different columns, and then the group kind of sits back and looks at organizing them and figuring out what they're going to do next about it. So that's just one example of a retrospective, but there's lots of those things that you can do. So in one of the exercises for this, you're going to take a look at this site, take a look at some retrospectives, and maybe pick one that you might use on a regular basis with your team. So the last kind of thought I want to talk about is this idea of taking time to sharpen the saw. And if you've ever read the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, this is the last chapter, and it really brings it all together and talks about continual improvement and renewing yourself, mentally, spiritually, and physically. And so we all know the kind of situation. You've probably all been in that situation where you're like, I'm too busy to take time to learn that thing, or I'm too busy to take time to reflect because I got so much to get done. And it's really important to kind of try to break ourselves out of that habit, because usually it's like the idea of, like in this case, the old parable of someone sharpening or cutting down a tree and having someone say, why don't you take time to sharpen the saw? And he says, I'm too busy sawing to sharpen it, right? And it's the same kind of thing. Like, for example, if you're using Trello and you're not very good at it and you don't know the details, you could take some time to watch a couple of tutorials and learn about it, and then it would make the rest of the project go smoother and faster. But if you get yourself into this mentality that, oh, I got to get this thing done, I don't have time, then you can you're basically benefiting the short term, but you're punishing the long term. If you take the long term view, then it's pausing now to take some time that will correct either reflecting on the team's performance or your own performance or whatever, then it'll actually benefit the long term. So it's really important to kind of figure out where in your schedule that these things are going to happen, and also to encourage it as a team. So if you're working in an environment where you go to take some time to learn about something or to reflect, and the rest of the team hammers you for wasting time, you're not too likely to take the time to sharpen the saw. So it's really important to create a culture of wanting to improve and wanting to get better, and that it's okay to sometimes sacrifice some of the short-term productivity in order to gain longer productivity over time. So I'll leave you with these two questions. How are you going to make time in your team for a regular retrospective on how things are going and how things can be improved? And then how will you show your team that taking time to sharpen the saw is actually something that's valued, and it's something that's celebrated, and not something that's considered wasting time or being lazy? Stuff to think about.